interesting times. For the headlines. Rescue workers toiled through a second night Thursday in a desperate bid to find survivors in the rubble of a Genoa bridge which caved in during a heavy rainstorm, killing at least 39 people and injuring 16 more. President Rodrigo Duterte has called on China to temper its behavior in the West Philippine Sea amid reports that China warned Philippine military aircraft while flying over its man-made islands in the disputed region. Branded enemy of the people by Donald Trump, the U.S. news media is responding with a campaign aimed at countering the president's narrative and highlighting the importance of a free press. War and Ebola, a double nightmare in eastern Congo. We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Cepeda. Rescue workers toiled through a second night in a desperate bid to find survivors in the rubble of a Genoa bridge, which caved in during a heavy rainstorm, killing at least 39 people and injuring 16 more. A vast span of the Morandi Bridge collapsed in the northern port city, sending about 35 cars and several trucks plunging 45 meters onto railway tracks below. Italy's government has blamed the firm that operated the collapsed bridge for the disaster and announced a state of emergency in the region. Children aged 8, 12, and 13 were among the dead. Interior Minister Matteo Salvini said that more people were still missing, 16 people were injured. Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte declared Wednesday a 12-month state of emergency in Genoa.
Abbiamo accolto la sua richiesta e decretato lo stato di emergenza per 12 mesi in conseguenza degli eventi che si sono verificati ieri mattina, 14 agosto 2018, a causa del crollo del viadotto noto come Ponte Morandi.
The tragedy has focused anger on the structural problems that have dogged the decades-old Morandi Bridge and the private sector firm Autostrade per l'Italia, which is currently in charge of operating and maintaining swaths of the country's motorways. Italy's transport minister called for the company management to resign and announced the government had launched a move to revoke the company's contract and hit it with a fine of 150 million euros, or that's $170 million. Deputy Prime Minister Luigi Di Maio, who arrived in Genoa on Wednesday morning, earlier said the tragedy could have been avoided. Ian Firth, former president of the Institution of Structural Engineers, provides his professional opinion on the Genoa Bridge disaster.
With bridges of this sort, the sorts of things that we would be looking for, if I were the investigating engineer, I would be wanting to look for signs of corrosion that might have been going on unnoticed, any other kind of degradation or deterioration. And of course, the key question is, what was it that went first? Because that would be the trigger that brought the thing down. We can speculate at this stage, but it would be a really bit too soon now. But they will be looking certainly for components that look as though they failed. And indeed, I'm sure this event is going to trigger a number of reviews of bridges of a similar age. I was going to say and type. There aren't very many other bridges of this type, but there are structural systems which have similarities.
The murder trial of two women accused of assassinating the half-brother of North Korea's leader can proceed. A Malaysian court ruled Thursday in a blow to their families who insist the pair were tricked into carrying out the dramatic hit. After hearing the prosecution case, the judge said there was sufficient evidence to support a murder charge against Siti Aiza from Indonesia and Dewan Thi Hong from Vietnam, accused of murdering Kim Jong-nam with nerve agent VX at Kuala Lumpur Airport. Judge Azmi Arifin said the evidence presented in court since the trial started in October pointed to a well-planned conspiracy with a group of North Korean suspects who are still at large. The women who are set to testify during the defense stage of the trial looked shocked and tearful as the ruling was handed down. The judge could have chosen to acquit the women if he thought the evidence was insufficient. Their families maintained the pair were fooled into carrying out the Cold War-style killing and had been hopeful they would be acquitted, although state prosecutors insisted they had a strong case. The women are accused of killing Kim Jong-nam, once seen as an heir to the North Korean leadership and a rival to current leader Kim Jong-un, by smearing toxic VX on his face in February last year as he waited to board a flight to Macau. The pair, who could face death by hanging if found guilty, claimed they fell victim to an elaborate plot hatched by North Korean agents and believed they were taking part in a prank for a reality show. Despite the evidence against them, the women's lawyers believe that the prosecutors had not shown they intended to kill him. They had been living in exile for a decade since falling out of favor with the North's ruling family.
We still maintain our client's innocence. We have a strong defense. The judge also found that the second accused one had disclosed his defense much earlier in view of the statement given by her about 5 days or 3 days after her arrest.
Yeah, we are still very confident that we have a good defense, and we, of course, it does not mean that the judge has found them guilty. What it means at this stage is that the judge finds that there's a prima facie case made out against them and that the case must proceed. Now the court wants to hear their version of the story.
The announcement that the first reunions in several years are to take place between families divided by the Korean War evokes bittersweet memories for Kim Jong-gil. Her few hours with her brother in 2014 under the watchful eyes of the North's agents were probably their last together. Watch this.
책도 없고 사진도 없고 다 남한테 혼자 있었지. 그러니라고 병원 생활을 많이 했지 뭐. 작년도 천진데 두 번 만나게 해달라는 건 사람 욕심이 정말. 쉬는 시간이 있어. 그럼 그때 이제 서로 모두 만나고 이런. 제일 기억나고 마고 뭐 잠깐 보고 뭐 희하고 보고 희하고 뭐 밤에 잠을 같이 자나 뭐 같이 자지도 안 하고 밥 먹을 때만 만나가지고 밥 먹고는 희하고 얘기할 시간도 없고 뭐 그래 그냥 잠깐 얼굴만 보고 온다 보이지 뭐 연락이 뭐 한 게 없어. 화장실 가보면 화장실에서 막 우는 사람도 있고 나와가지고도 아이고 괜히 왔다고 이러는 사람도 있고 그렇게는 하더라고. 뉴스에 몇 번 보여줘가지고 사람들이 딴 동네 사람도 막 우리 나를 나갈게 없어. 잠을 다 타더라고 무릎 쪽.
이 마당을 여전하네요. 그때 저 왔을 때 꽃 되게 많아.
다시 만날 날이 올 거다 이러더라고. 다시 만날 날이 올 거다. 내가 울었더니 울지 말고 헤어지자. 만날 날이 올 거다. 헤어졌죠.
Cambodian leader Hun Sen has swept all seats in parliament after holding an election with no opposition, as the country settles into one-party rule and a government that could face questions of legitimacy on the world stage. The strongman has been in power for 33 years, but the vote late last month was widely described as a sham after a crackdown on the rival Cambodian National Rescue Party, or CNRP, which was dissolved by the Supreme Court in November. A spokesman for the National Election Committee told AFP as official results were released that the ruling Cambodian Party, or the ruling Cambodian People's Party CPP, won all 125 seats up for grabs and took nearly 77% of the vote. In a post on his Facebook page, Hun Sen said the election was free, fair, and just. U.S. State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert said Washington would expand its restrictions on granting visas to include Cambodians responsible for the most notable anti-democratic actions taken in the run-up to the flawed July 29 election. Nauert said Wednesday the visa sanctions would apply to people in and outside the government, as well as their immediate family members in some cases. U.S. President Donald Trump revoked the security clearance of former Central Intelligence Agency Director John Brennan and warned several other prominent critics they too risk being blacklisted. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders announced the decision by reading a statement from Mr. Trump.
As the head of the executive branch and commander-in-chief, I have a unique constitutional responsibility to protect the nation's classified information, including by controlling access to it. Today, in fulfilling that responsibility, I've decided to revoke the security clearance of John Brennan, former director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
In a highly unusual directive, Trump claimed that Brennan, a former station chief in Riyadh who rose to lead the formidable spy agency, had become erratic. Brennan is a frequent Trump critic. Just hours before Trump issued the edict, the former CIA chief had accused the Republican leader of failing to live up to minimum standards of decency, civility, and probity.
Any benefits that senior officials might glean from consultations with Mr. Brennan are now outweighed by the risks posed by his erratic conduct and behavior. Second, that conduct and behavior has tested and far exceeded the limits of any professional courtesy that may have been due to him. Mr. Brennan has a history that calls into question his objectivity and credibility.
In a statement, Trump suggested the ex-spy chief had tossed around unfounded and outrageous allegations, wild outbursts on the internet and television about this administration, and engaged in increasingly frenzied commentary. Brennan, who has briefed Republican and Democratic presidents, could now lose access to classified information, a courtesy usually afforded to former senior officials to all political stripes. The White House has been besieged by a scandal over a former aide's tell-all memoir in recent days, and often tries to diffuse crisis by stoking new controversy. It said that 8 other officials could also lose their clearances. The individuals were accused, without details, of politicizing and monetizing their public service and security clearances.
Any access granted to our nation's secrets should be in furtherance of national, not personal interest. For this reason, I've also begun to review the more general question of the access to classified information by government officials. As part of this review, I am evaluating action with respect to the following individuals: James Clapper, James Comey, Michael Hayden, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and Bruce Orr.
And after Trump's surprise decision was made public at a White House briefing, Brennan quickly hit back, accusing the president of trying to curb free speech in a politically motivated action that he said should gravely worry all Americans. This action is part of a broader effort by Mr. Trump to suppress freedom of speech, punish critics, Brennan fired back. It should gravely worry all Americans, including intelligence professionals, about the cost of speaking out. My principles are worth far more than clearances. I will not relent. In an interview with MSNBC, for which he works as an analyst, Brennan said, if Mr. Trump believes that this is going to lead me to just go away and be quiet, he is very badly mistaken. Branded enemy of the people by Donald Trump, the U.S. news media is responding with a campaign aimed at countering the president's narrative and highlighting the importance of a free press. More than 200 news organizations are to participate in a coordinated campaign with editorials about the importance of an independent media and a social media hashtag enemy of none. The move comes in response to a call by the Boston Globe amid a growing sense of unease that Trump's rhetoric is harmful to a free press and may even incite violence against journalists.
Watch this. Does everybody like the press? Do you think the media is fair? Tell the truth. I better not go any further. I better not go any further. But they can make anything bad because they are the fake, disgusting news.
As a businessman, I was always treated really well by the press. You know, the numbers speak and things happen, but I've always really had a very good press. And it wasn't until I became a politician that I realized how nasty, how mean, how vicious, and how fake the press can be as the cameras start going off in the back.
And I mean truly dishonest people in the media and the fake media. They make up stories. They have no sources in many cases. They say a source says there is no such thing, but they don't report the facts.
I like real news, not fake news. You're fake news. Thank you.
The Boston Daily said it called on editorial boards nationwide to write and publish editorials denouncing a dirty war against the free press. The coordinated effort comes amid Trump's ongoing claims of fake news from media outlets that publish unfavorable articles and calling mainstream media outlets the enemy. Free press advocates argue that Trump's efforts threaten the role of the press as a check against abuse of power in government and imperils the constitutional First Amendment protection for journalists. Gunmen launched an attack on an intelligence training center in Kabul. Officials said just a day after a suicide bomber killed dozens of students in the war-weary city. Several gunmen were firing on a training facility overseen by the National Security Directorate, Afghanistan's intelligence agency, from a nearby construction site, according to officials. There was no immediate claim of responsibility for the attack. The attack comes hours after a suicide bomber detonated explosives inside an education center in western Kabul, where students were studying for college entrance exams, killing at least 37 people. The surge in violence comes weeks after Afghans marked an unprecedented country-wide ceasefire between the Taliban and the government forces in June, giving some relief to civilians. President Rodrigo Duterte has called on China to temper its behavior in the West Philippine Sea amid reports that China warned Philippine military aircraft while flying over its man-made islands in the disputed region. Duterte said that China should rethink of warning other countries from flying the airspace above the artificial island China built in the WPS or West Philippine Sea or South China Sea.
Well, they have to rethink that because that would be a flashpoint someday. And even, warning other, you cannot create an island, it's man-made, and you say that the air above this artificial island is yours.
Last Monday, presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said an investigation will be conducted if the Chinese military has repeatedly ordered the Philippine military aircraft to leave immediately, or you will bear responsibility for all the consequences. The Chinese military also reportedly issued warning to the U.S. military aircraft, which also conducted overflights over the South China Sea.
So it's very clear that the gambit really is the China Sea. But one of these days, I said, before my term ends, I assured you that I will talk to them.
Duterte had even temporarily shelved a 2016 arbitral tribunal's ruling that nullified China's 9-dash line map that covers nearly whole of South China in favor of friendly relations. The president, however, said he would raise the verdict of the Hague-based permanent court of arbitration before his 6-year term and in 2022, despite China's rejection of the ruling.
That is wrong because those waters are what we consider international sea. And the right of innocent passage is guaranteed. It does not need any permission to sail through the open seas. And if it's nearby a territorial water, you guarantee what you would call the right of innocent passage. So I hope that China would temper its at least with its behavior. I do not want to quarrel with China. But at this time, because you will create America, instead of obeying get out, China will say, we go in.
More news will be coming your way when Eagle News International returns. The Development Budget Coordination Committee on Tuesday presented to the Senate Finance Committee the proposed 757 trillion peso national budget for 2019, the third budget of the Duterte administration and the first cash-based budget of the government. The proposed 2019 National Expenditure Program represents 19.3% of the gross domestic product and is 13% higher than the 2018 budget. In his presentation, Budget Secretary Benjamin Diokno said the DBCC adopted the annual cash-based system for next year as a means to minimize and gradually eliminate underspending in government, as well as to modernize the country's budgeting system to become a par with international standards. Diokno pointed out that since President Rodrigo Duterte came into power, the administration has instituted measures to cut underspending in government.
We can do what we want to do without this budget reform bill. This is just we just want this legislated so that it will be a structural reform, so that the next president will not go back to the old practice. All the projects in the budget are implementation ready. Wala yung mga iniisip pa lang ng mga proyekto.
Unwilling to accept the cash-based appropriation system, the House, which prefers the obligation-based budgeting system, suspended hearing on the proposed budget for 2019 last week to give the Department of Budget and Management and the Development Budget Coordination Committee time to make necessary changes. The executive branch put its foot down.
That's an illusion. It's just an illusion na mataas yung appropriation, therefore mataas yung disbursement. That's not true. Ang baba nga ng disbursement nila under the old system. The pattern here is that for those agencies which are not able to move their projects quickly and efficiently, we reduce their budget.
Shares in Italian infrastructure group Atlantia, which operates the motorway on which a bridge in Genoa collapsed, were initially suspended on the Milan Stock Exchange, but plunged more than 24% when trading resumed an hour later. Atlantia's prime asset is Autostrade per l'Italia, which operates the A10 highway, where a segment of the overpass collapsed on Tuesday, killing at least 39 people. Its shares had already closed 5.4% lower on Tuesday. Milan had been closed for a public holiday on Wednesday, but when Atlantia shares reopened after an hour's delay on Thursday, they were down 24.4% at 17.79 euros after the government suggested that it could revoke Autostrade's operating license for the motorway. The Italian government said it intended to fine the firm 150 million euros and cancel its concession. China will send a senior negotiator to the United States in late August to resume trade talks, its Commerce Ministry said Thursday, the first public meeting on the dispute in weeks as the trade conflict intensifies. Beijing and Washington have slapped tariffs on tens of billions of dollars worth of each other's goods since they held their last high-level meeting in June, raising fears that the trade war could shake the global economy. At the invitation of the United States, a delegation led by Vice Commerce Minister Wang Zhuwen, the Deputy Representative on International Trade Negotiations, will meet with a team led by senior U.S. Treasury official David Malpass, the ministry said in a statement. Beijing's ministry said China welcomes dialogue and communication on the basis of reciprocity, equality, and integrity.
Businesses, U.S. consumers, U.S. workers, and the interests of businesses in China.
We'll be back with more news right after this break.
The garden. A world that recaptures the value of life, creating your moments, kindling your passion, worth reliving over and over. This is your world, your life, your garden.
The death toll from floods in India's tourist hotspot of Kerala increased to 77 on Thursday as torrential rainfall threatened new areas. Over 60,000 people have now entered relief camps, and the Army and Navy have stepped up rescue operations in the southern state using a helicopter to airlift people, a Kerala disaster management official said. The official added that all districts are under red alert as more rains are expected in the next 24 hours, the official added. The death toll rose by 10 overnight, and the state official said it was expected to go higher during the day. Flights, train and metro services have been suspended in the flood-ravaged state. Kerala, famed for its pristine palm-lined beaches and tea plantations, is battered by the monsoon every year, but this year's damage is the worst in decades. Floods have also caused havoc in neighboring Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh states. Red tide, a toxic and invisible algae that has killed thousands among sea mammals, turtles, and fish, is now suffocating Florida's tourism-based economy. A state of emergency has been declared in Florida as the worst red tide in a decade blackens the ocean water, killing dolphins, sea turtles, and fish at a relentless pace. More than 100 tons of dead sea creatures have been shoveled up from smelly, deserted beaches in tourist areas along Florida's southwest coast this month alone. In just the past week, 12 dolphins washed ashore dead in Sarasota County, typically the toll seen in an entire year.
What this neurotoxin does when it gets into the waterways, it inhibits, such as fish, it inhibits the abilities for that fish to exchange gases, the CO2 it wants to expel, and the uptake of oxygen. What we're seeing firsthand here is a lot of dead fish, and as well as we've had manatees, we've had sea turtles, dolphins, we even had a whale shark wash ashore dead from the effects of the red tide. But there's also such a huge economic loss to these areas. Also, we've got very dense communities along the shoreline. They're all wanting to put fertilizers on their lawns and things like that. We've also had a hurricane event last year, Hurricane Irma, that came right through this area. Hurricanes have a way of dredging up all these nutrients that had settled into the sand.
It really definitely hurts. I mean, it's hurt our business, like I say about 40% of our customers don't come because they just don't feel comfortable going out there.
Industrial farming and improper waste treatment can foster the growth of toxic blue-green algae or cyanobacteria, another problem plaguing Florida waters. First came the war, which developed into a brutal, bloody tussle between militias who abused civilians or killed them. Now, Ebola, a name almost as dreaded as death itself, has come. In the Beni region in the Democratic Republic of Congo's eastern province of Kivu, the twin peril has bred fear and despair. The region is haunted in particular by the Allied Defense Forces, or ADF, an Ugandan Islamist rebel group blamed for hundreds of civilian deaths over the past 4 years. On August 1, Beni declared an outbreak of Ebola epicentered in Mangina, a small town that had been a relative haven from the fighting, where 6 members of the same family died of the disease. To date, 41 people have died in the North Kivu region from the viral disease, which causes high fever and bleeding.
Yes. Active conflict is the other challenge, and the red zones which are inaccessible. And of course, in addition to that, the high population density, the high population movement, not only internally but across borders into neighboring countries, are the serious challenges. What we are asking the international community is to help in ensuring access to the inaccessible areas. And also we call on the warring parties for cessation of hostilities, because the virus is dangerous to all. It doesn't choose between this group or that group. This is a very dangerous enemy, and we have to be vigilant, and we have to follow 24/7. And we need to be very flexible in changing the way we tackle the virus based on the situation. We have to be pragmatic, and that's what we're saying. So at all levels, including myself, we're focused on following up the situation, and the follow-up is 24/7, and we will do or decide the right thing based on the situation.
The torch for the 18th Asian Games reached Indonesia's capital, Jakarta, on Wednesday, ending a month-long journey across the Southeast Asian archipelago nation. It was also welcomed in style by marching bands, traditional dances, and concerts after starting its journey in the host country's cultural center, Yogyakarta, on July 17. The flame was lit in India's capital, New Delhi, which hosted the first Asian Games in 1951. Organizers hope the torch relay will attract at least 1 million spectators across the sprawling Indonesian capital. Some 10,000 torch bearers, including Indonesian badminton legends Rudy Hartono, Ijuk Sugarshato, and Ricky Zubadja, will be taking part in the relay. The torch is set to arrive Saturday at the Gelora Bung Karno Stadium for the game's opening ceremonies, ending its 18,000-kilometer journey across 54 cities. Indonesia is hosting some 11,000 athletes and 5,000 officials from 45 Asian countries for the August 18 to September 2 event. In basketball, NBA has allowed Jordan Clarkson and is finally with the Philippine team in the 2018 Asian Games after securing a one-time exemption from the NBA. Samahang Basketball ng Pilipinas officials confirmed the 6'5" Phil-American guard of the Cleveland Cavaliers is taking a flight to Manila from Los Angeles via Singapore to join the rest of the hastily assembled team coached by Yang Giao. Just hours earlier, SBP President Al Panlilio spoke on the phone with the NBA Deputy Commissioner and recent Manila visitor Mark Tatum, who gave a one-time exemption to Clarkson and the two NBA players suiting for China at the Games. Although the NBA made it clear that the Asiad is not part of the agreement it has with the FIBA with regards to the release of its players, the US League has decided to grant a one-time exemption to Clarkson and Chinese player Zhu Qi of the Houston Rockets and Ding Yuhang of Dallas Mavericks due to a lack of clear communication of that agreement between the NBA and the Chinese and Philippines basketball federations. The NBA veteran, however, will have to sit out on the opening game against Kazakhstan as he's set to arrive in Jakarta at 10 a.m. of Thursday, the exact scheduled tip-off of the match. Clarkson had to take the earliest available flight out of the US to Indonesia when the NBA and his smaller ball club finally gave him the thumbs up to play in the quadrennial meet on Tuesday. Meanwhile, Philippines defeated Kazakhstan 96-59 in the opening game of the 5-on-5 men's basketball competition of the 18th Asian Games Jakarta Palembang 2018 at the Gelora Bung Karno Basketball Hall, Jakarta Selatan. Stanley Pringle led the Philippines with 18 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and 1 steal. Christian Stan Hardinger finished with game high with 15 points with 5 rebounds, while James Siap had 12 points and 6 rebounds. In tennis, Novak Djokovic battled stomach issues to beat Adriana Manarino and reached the third round. The Wimbledon champion called for the doctor during the second set but put aside his discomfort to progress for 6-6, 6-2, 6-1 over the Frenchman before rain-halted afternoon play for nearly 3 hours. And these are the stories for EN Sports. I'm Ben Bernaldez and I'm on with 25.
Thank you, Ben. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards on Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Cepeda. Thanks for joining us. And I'm Juan with 25.